ember.js versus hexagonal.js. And versus Angular and versus whatever JS. Okay, so I'd like you guys to introduce yourself maybe very quickly.
Okay, hi, I'm Pohorecki. I'll be representing Angular.js, which is awesome. It beats the other frameworks hands down, so there's really no need for this discussion, but okay, so maybe this other frameworks, but it doesn't beat Hexagonal, which is not a framework. So hi, I'm Andrzej Krzywda, and I'm representing Hexagonal.js, which is I think a different beast among here, and I will try to explain the ideas behind Hexagonal.
Hi, I'm Piotr Sarnacki, and I will be representing ember.js. I'm a contributor, and when I started doing more JavaScript development, I started doing Ember, and I love it, so I will be talking about it today.
Hello, I'm Piotr. I got infected with JavaScript around some months ago, and I'm making quite good progress with Backbone, and I like it a lot, so I thought it's good time to sit here.
Okay.
In recent years, we saw the movement in the web that many of applications were developed in the manner of putting whole or most of the logic in the client side. And I'm not sure if it will gonna dominate the whole web, or is it just about single page applications. Is SPAs dominating web now, and can anything be a single page app? There's a question for all of you.
Well, from my experience, I think it's just for some parts of some applications. It's not needed everywhere. So.
Yeah, for me, it's mostly about interactivity. If you have applications that needs to be interactive, that needs to handle a lot of events, a lot of changes without reloading a page, you should probably go into single page apps approach. But if you have mostly static page, which needs to be indexed by Google, and you don't have to put too much interactivity there, you probably will be fine with regular static pages. Or raise views or something like that. So it mostly depends on use case. I would not say that it will dominate or not the internet, because there will be place for each type of application.
So I think that there's no point in not doing single page application right now. The user experience is much better, and the architecture is better for us as developers. And usually the customers are more happy when they have single-page applications. So I don't see any reason. The reason we are doing what we are doing here, like among Ruby programmers, is mostly historical reasons. The browsers were not able to run the applications before, but now I think they are able, so we can use it.
Yeah, I think that for the browser part, we have already the tools and the browsers that can handle single-page applications and really rich applications that run on the client side. We're still missing the link between the server side and the client side, so we're still short on programming languages that can run both on the client and on the server. You can use JavaScript like with Node.js, but because Node.js is like evented I/O, so this programming model is not for everyone. It's not as easy as say the one that we're familiar with, Ruby and Rails or Sinatra. So as much as I like writing single-page apps, I think that in order there to have a really good experience writing them, we still need some tools on the backend.
Well, obviously backend is still needed, but I think it's better to treat them as two separate applications. So the frontend, usually you should start with your frontend, and then you can switch and work on the backend once you know what you need. So.
Yeah, but there's still the question of security, and security meaning how do you validate your data both on the client and on the server. And there are, and if you can't write this code just once, you'll bound to rework stuff and make bugs by duplicating logic not exactly in the same way.
Well, from backbone point of view, I think it's more like a jQuery library, which we see almost in every application right now. And it's also probably that many applications will become better if you add a little bit of backbone into the application. So I think it's also good, well, to think a little bit on single-page application, even if you don't use it right now for your use cases.
I would like to say only that if you have page like, so for example, question to Andrzej, would you write something like Wikipedia or any other content site which mainly displays content and does not meet interactivity other than some kind of simple editing? Would you write it in as a single page app which just communicates with API?
And why?
Yeah, so that's a tricky question. If I would have to just clone the existing user interface for Wikipedia, which I don't think is really an excellent one, and then probably I wouldn't say it's a good fit for a single page application, but I'm not a really good user experience designer, but I think there's a lot we can do with the Wikipedia user interface, and then we can make it a single page application, and that would be really great. So yes, I would do it as a single page application.
Okay, and what about browser indexing by search engines? That's really important, and that's another place where the tooling is missing.
So it's kind of a myth right now that single-page applications are not indexable. Google has an official document how to make your website crawlable, and basically it comes down to you have to do some work on the server, but it's just rendering a very simple HTML. You don't have to deal with the JavaScript and CSS. So it is additional work that you don't really need to do when you don't do a single-page application, but it's very easy and it's official, so it's not really the case anymore.
And regarding indexing for SEO, I think I saw in the JavaScript community something about Phantom.js, that you just go through the whole application and you get a page with the links somehow that SEO can use.
Yeah, that's just the problem is that if you write like a regular Rails style application, you don't need to do that. So that's something that you have to write. I mean, I've actually implemented something that used Phantom.js for that exact purpose, and it took me a couple of hours. But I know there are probably some corner cases there, and maybe caching issues there that I'm not aware of right now. And that's something that that's sort of it's additional work that you have to do, and that's what makes me say that single-page apps are still require more work than a regular app.
Excuse me. Let's switch to another topic. The next topic is just selling part, when you will show all the important and killer features of your approaches and maybe some philosophy. So, who wants to start?
Okay, so I got the mic. So I'll start. I'm representing hexagonal.js, and I'll be surprised if you heard about it. So it was used for more than 1 year in production in my team, and we used it for, I don't know, maybe 40 of front-end applications. It's not really a framework. There's nothing that we can download and use. It's more like a set of guidelines, like an approach, architecture, style. So it's like as if you would combine Uncle Bob recommendations for Rails, and then you add some things that Ragnarok did, so aspect-oriented programming library, and you also use the hexagonal architecture, which is a very simple approach to write code on any platform. Then the result is actually hexagonal.js, and so I can't really compete with the frameworks because there's nothing that you can actually download. But if you go to the website, you can download the example applications, and we have a lot of them, and we will add more to this set of examples. So it's more like a set of guidelines right now.
Okay. So I represent Ember, and if you didn't hear about Ember, it's a framework which tries to do as much as as it could for managing your application and keeping all the housework and make it easier to write less code. So what I like in Ember is that when you go for some lighter approach like Backbone or Hexagonal, you need to write a lot of code to manage views, especially nested views. You need to manage bindings, events, and a lot of other stuff. And when your application grows bigger, it gets really tricky to make it all work and remember about managing all this stuff. And what's more, if framework does not have this code, you need to write it yourself. So yes, Backbone may be minimalistic, or other frameworks may be minimalistic and simple, but someone will gonna write this code, so it will end up in your application rather than in framework. So if you have small framework maintainers will not have a chance to optimize anything, to help you manage things, and you will, if you have any problems in your application, like memory leak, you will have to do it yourself. So that's mainly our philosophy, to do as much as it can with application management, so you can write as small amount of code as it's possible.
For Backbone, I think the main argument is it's very small, it's very minimal, and the good thing is that you don't bring too much dependencies into your code by this. So you really can build up slowly your models, your views, and when you need a controller, you write a controller. If you don't need a controller, you can pass it. And also the router, you just take it when you need it, and by this, maybe you minimize bugs, but probably only time will tell. And what I also think is interesting is that the version 0.5, I think, started when it became popular, Backbone. Now we are at 0.9, and the changes are not that big. So I remember going from Rails, which is a big framework, from 2 to 3, or maybe from 3 to 4. It's always a headache. I think Backbone is a small framework, so maybe it doesn't break so much when you go to the next version.
Of course, that the Backbone depends on jQuery and underscore, right? So you
can take everything also.
Okay, so I think that between the four of us, we represent approaches that vary in multiple different ways. But I think that two of those things are pretty important, and one is whether you have two bidirectional data binding, which is, I think, that if you are choosing a JavaScript framework right now, this is the key feature that you should be looking for, really, because this is the feature that removes the part of your code that's most brittle, that's hardest to test, which is the synchronization of HTML and your JavaScript, right? In the middle of every single page JavaScript application, there's a wall. And there's HTML on one side, and there's JavaScript on the other side. And whether your framework asks you to peer through the wall and see how does this HTML look like, how can I bind to this button, or how can I pull the data from this text field, or maybe from the HTML side, how did this change? How do I have to re-render myself? This is really, really important. And I mean, if you choose a framework that has bidirectional data binding, you'll not really still see the difference. And the other way those frameworks differ is some of those frameworks, like Ember, are essentially languages. Ember implements its own object model. It forces you to use get and set everywhere where you would use just property access in JavaScript. And Backbone as well. And this really forces your application to become Ember, become Backbone. Whereas if you use, say, hexagonal or Angular, you write pure JavaScript. Your code is pure JavaScript. The only way you depend on the library is by calling it. By getting things in your constructor or a factory function, and you get to call it. It's super easy to test. I mean, it's as easy to test as it can get. And your application can live outside of Angular. It can live. You could conceivably use Angular.js with hexagonal.js, which I tried to convince Andrzej yesterday, but I think that Angular is a framework that lets you build large JavaScript applications easily. It's backed by Google. It's more mature than Ember, for example. It's not anymore in this phase where it changes from week to week. I encourage you all to try it.
Okay, I just have to cover the topic of data binding. I think in most cases it's not as important as you might think. I was involved in many JavaScript projects, and data binding, I never used data binding, maybe in 3 applications, I don't know. But it's not as important, and manually controlling the changes and updating the GUI components is not as difficult. It's just writing some code, and if you do it well, it's as declarative as in Angular or other data binding frameworks. So yes, Hexagonal doesn't have data binding built in any way. I believe that the application is not about data changes, but it's about some actions happening. So it's more being bound to method calls instead of observing the data being changed.
So I totally agree that data binding is a really important thing to have in the framework, so I agree with Adam on that part. And actually, I think that both Angular and Ember, I probably should not say that on the fight, but I think that those frameworks are good for building big applications. And I don't agree that managing views and other parts of your application by yourself is easy, because maybe Andrzej was not writing the kind of applications that needed so much data bindings, but when you have like 4 or 5 nested views into like 4 or 5 levels of nesting, and you need to manage all those nested views, like manage 4th or 5th level of nested view, it gets complicated, and then you can end up with zombie views. There's a lot of questions in Google about backbone and zombie views, which you end up with when you don't properly clean up after destroying a parent view. I have actually one comment about this JavaScript thing and Angular, because Angular has its own compiler for the DOM elements. So if you want to extend the framework and write directives, which is like some kind of components for Angular, you actually need to use a lot of Angular code, and for me it's magic, because you need to know how this compiler works, you need to know how Angular manages DOM elements, you need to know what are transclusions, which I'm not sure what that's after reading the documentation on it. So while I agree that probably building application in Angular, like simple app that you don't need to, where you don't need custom components, may be easy. When you want to build on top of Angular, like make your own components, it will get harder. And the second problem with Angular for me is that their data bindings are made with a concept of dirty check-in. So if you have an object and something changes, Angular does not track that this property was changed by observing this property and making some kind of trigger, but it checks if the property was changed. So Angular creator says that you probably can't have more than 2,000 things bind into a page, and he says that probably you will need that amount anyway. But if you will need more, for example, like some kind of big table or something like that, you are screwed, because it will be just too slow.
Okay, so in the application we wrote, we had one screen that looked basically like Google spreadsheets, only that in every cell of that spreadsheet you could have various rich elements like drop downs, buttons, all kinds of stuff. And that table could have been about 500 rows and about 500 columns wide in size. I mean, you couldn't load the data for that table in a single JSON request. And we managed to do that in Angular. So sure, you can, if you want your site to be responsive, you have to watch for the limit of the numbers of things that are bound, watched at any given moment. But I mean, if you look at Google spreadsheets anyway, it doesn't render the whole table, right? So it's not that hard to actually model your view in a way that you just don't watch so many things. So that's not that hard. Directives, yeah, I kind of agree with you. When we developed our application, we actually avoided directives. That was in the Angular 0.9. Things changed a lot since then. I would use directives now because most of the time you just need a little bit of directive to replace a little snippet of HTML, and with a tiny bit of logic which you can implement in pure JavaScript as a controller, which I really like. But yeah, directives are a way of like helpers for your HTML. You only introduce them as you encounter duplication in your views, and transclusion is really not that hard. It has been around since the 80s. It's just a fairly long word for meaning including one piece of like HTML into another, and that's all.
Okay, let's switch to another topic. Adam started talking about pure JavaScript code, and that you don't have to mix, you don't have to be driven by Angular with your architecture. What about other approaches? So do you have to take mindset of the framework's creators when you develop your apps in that framework?
So basically on Angular, most of the things are optional. So if you don't like the Angular's router, you don't have to use it. If you don't like dependency injection, you don't have to use it. There's the part of like the HTML compiler. I mean, if you don't use it, then you probably lose the most benefit of Angular, like binding data from JavaScript to HTML and the way Angular displays it. But you don't have to use directives. You don't have to use filters. I mean, it's really up to you how you structure your application, and the domain part of your application, the core that should really work. I mean, this is pure JavaScript, so you really structure it the way you want.
So I think it's a problem of all of the frameworks here, including hexagonal right now. All of the word here's of the words, we use different terminology for different things. So maybe controller means almost the same everywhere, but apart from that, I think each of us uses different words for different things, and that's a problem of all of the frameworks and all of these approaches being in their infancy years. So we're far from being Rails. Any of us is far from being Rails, so it's not really mature enough. So yeah, I think each of us tries to force our own mindset, our own architecture, the explanation, and you can probably use each of them step by step, but it's still different.
For the question of learning Backbone, I had the experience that combining Rails and Backbone from the first day was not really so nice combination, because when Rails 3.2, when I started with this, the asset pipeline needed to compile the CoffeeScript, and then you need to learn again a bit about about CoffeeScript and about the asset pipeline. So I really like now just working with pure JavaScript and actually have Rails out of the equation and work with Sinatra, and then just Rails for the API for the JSON backend. And maybe it's not really the question you were talking about, but I think it's good to keep in mind JavaScript. It's really the language which we work in Backbone, I think.
It's the assembly.
It's the assembly.
Yeah, so as Adam mentioned earlier, Ember has its own class model, and it needs using set and get on objects to get and set any data. And it's done mainly for making it easy to optimize and change things in the framework without touching applications code. So, as I said earlier, Ember is about convention over configuration, so you can probably think that Ember is like race approach in JavaScript world. And it's good that Patrick mentioned Sinatra, because probably you could make this comparison that Ember is more like Rails and Backbone is more like Sinatra. But if you think about Sinatra, I don't know anyone who built application, like very big application, and was using only Sinatra without any plugins or without creating something like Padrino or something like that. Because it just doesn't scale to build one monolithic application in Sinatra, because you start to go into a lot of problems. So for me, this is the same thing with Backbone and other like small frameworks, that when you start building really big applications, you need people start creating plugins like Marionette, which manages nested views, and some plugins for event handlers, and so on and so on. So you end up with Ember built from small plugins, but now you need to manage all those connections with those plugins. If something breaks, you need to probably, I don't know, like look for solutions on how to make the plugins work together. So you are entering the world of pain if you want to write a very big application with this small framework.
Okay, so I think we have completely opposite opinions on when to use a framework. I would use a framework if I want to generate a prototype and do something very quickly, very typical and very small application. Once the application grows, it has my own, well, the domain's word, and I don't want the framework to go into my way. I don't want to follow the framework anymore. I want to have control over the application. So I think that's an opposite opinion, where I would probably, I could use Ember for very small things. I wouldn't use it for bigger things.
Okay, so last question, last thing that I would like to get from you is how to be involved in the community, how to start working with your frameworks, how to learn it, and maybe develop some features for it.
So Angular, I think, is very good documentation, and the source code is also very clean. The tests tell you a lot about how the application works, and it's well structured. So if you want to know how Angular works, go to the docs. If you want to help Angular get better, just go to the GitHub. All the issues and development happens in there. There's very active mailing list. If you ask a question on Stack Overflow, you'll get an answer very, very fast.
Okay, so with Hexagonal we just started. So it was in production for 1 year, but we actually got the name just recently. The website is up just since 1 month, I think, and we got some documentation, we got some examples. We're still far, far behind all the other friends here, but we have a strong team behind it, and it's not really a framework, so we don't really have that much to document. Our goal is to show some guidelines how to use those buttons. So that's where we are. And if anyone is interested, please join us and help us.
So Ember is currently in the first RC. So till now it was a bit of Wild West because many things were changing constantly. Because we were looking for right approach to handle single page apps. But now, after the RC is out, there will be no major changes in features in code. So I think that this is a very good moment to start checking out Ember. And if you checked out Ember before and you were beaten by lack of documentation or by the fact that something was changing, you may want to check it out again. And yeah, so you can go to ember.js website, you can find guides there. Guides is probably the best way to start. If you have any problems, you can ask on IRC. This is probably the fastest way to get an answer. Or there is a Google group for Ember. And if you have any other questions, you can ping us on Twitter like me or people like us or any other person who works on Ember?
For backbone, I think the learning happens in the JavaScript community, so you need to go to another conference for this, I would say. Yeah, it's a real, there are many JavaScript developers out there, and they also can help, even Ruby programmers are nicer, but also there are nice JavaScript people, so.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen.